Good afternoon, North Carolina. This is Dr. Thomas Washburn with the Law and Public Safety Education Network. And this year, we have been in the midst of a big initiative on teaching literacy in the classrooms. And I know as a teacher, when I used to teach, every time someone would come in with some new initiative, I always shook my head and was like, I have time for that. I've got so much going on. It's already really hard to get everything in on time. It's already hard to get everything I'm expected to do. But I actually want you to kind of put that in the back seat and just open up your mind and trust me. I was in the classroom 30 years and I understand where you're at, but this project takes that into consideration. So just come at this with an open mind and let's talk about why literacy. So, as many as 1 in 5 high school seniors, graduates, are functionally illiterate. What that means is they're able to maybe read a passage out loud, but they really don't understand what they're reading. They may be able to get through a test, but they really struggle with understanding. They really struggle with, particularly as they grow older, they're going to have a more difficult time with things like technical manuals and things that they're going to be required to read at work. 1 in 5, you got to think about that nationwide. And certainly some schools do better than others. Socioeconomics plays a factor, I'm sure. Um, but when we look at the overall research that comes out, when do our graduates, who do we project to go into poverty and who do we project to end up in trouble with the law? And a huge number of those are those who fail to graduate and those who are functionally illiterate. Those are two of our bigger statistics, as is teen pregnancy. And so we are in a very unique situation in career tech in that we usually teach our kids more content time. If you're at a comprehensive high school, you're going to have these students 3 years, possibly, maybe even 4. If you're at a regional center, you're going to have these kids for half a day, 2 hours a day. We have a tremendous opportunity to make an impact. And this topic's particularly personal for me. I know that those you know me are probably going to be surprised about this, but I have a very severe learning disorder. And as a child, I couldn't read well at all. I was behind in reading, I was behind grade level, really struggled in school. At the time when I grew up in the 70s, special education was, you pretty much had to be severe special needs to get servicing. And I struggled in school, really hard time. And then about ninth grade, I had a teacher, Miss Brown, who was straight out of college. She was kind of mean, but she was young. I guess she had to be mean. But one thing was I failed a number of reading assessments and assignments, and she was very frustrated with me. And she finally just said, "You know what? I read an article on this. I'm not going to make you read the books we read in class. I want you to choose any book in the world you want to read." Well, at the time, this is back in like 1981, Stephen King was really big. And if you've ever read a Stephen King novel, they tend to be really long. So when I proposed reading, I think it was The Shining by Stephen King, she agreed to let me read it, but she actually said, that's a really long book, but I was really motivated to read it. And that was the first time in my life I ever finished a book. Took me a long time. I stayed up really late reading and also stayed up very late terrified because that book is flat out scary. But she tapped into something that I learned later as an educator. The more you read, the better you get at it. And when you run into someone who's a poor reader, they're already had a lot of failure. They're gun shy. They don't want to read. And that was me in ninth grade. And so I had her the next semester. And once again, I had the opportunity to, she let me choose another book and I chose another Stephen King novel. But she started me on this lifelong journey of reading. Today, later as a freshman in college, I was finally found out I had dyslexia, severe dyslexia. I have a very unique form of it in which I actually can read in a mirror faster than I can read looking at it straight on. I still don't like reading out loud when I'm in my Bible studies at church. They're always like, read this verse, and I'm terrified. I remember in high school, I would skip classes where we read out loud because I was so petrified that people would find out that I can't read very well, but I read in my own way. It's very strange. I see the images and I can process them now because I've read so much. I can actually read really fast now. but I don't read normal. So when I read out loud, even as a 53-year-old, I don't read it correctly. And so this literacy initiative is personal to me. And over years, I saw so many student success stories. And I'll share one with you a little later. But I want you to look at this. 1 in 5 of our kids, we're graduating. We are fundamentally failing. And let's talk about it. Why should it be you? Why should it be us? Why career tech? Well, first of all, we get their interest. We're very fortunate that the kids are usually in our class for the most part, want to be there. We are giving a material that they're very comfortable with, a material they want to learn more about. So we can get their attention. We have things that we can let them read out of the ordinary. I mean, how many kids read about murder, and how many kids read about, serial killers, or about cops, or, just firefighters, things like that. And so we can get their attention. And also, this last point's really important, is every single career that we teach requires them to have literacy. I can remember the one year that I taught fire, I was surprised how many regulations and how many things that there were to read, even in the fire program. Um, I'd just never been exposed to the content of reading that you have to do in a to be a proficient in fire. Obviously, EMT, they're constantly reading to study, reading medical materials and such. So all that we teach, every area has to have these students in a very strong proficiency. So a number of years ago, I did some research and I asked ninth graders. Now it has to do with study skills, but I think it works with reading as well. I asked my ninth graders, and I did a study across several classes, not just my own. Who taught them how to prepare for high school? Who taught them how to study? Who taught them how to use a journal? Who taught them how to keep up on a calendar? And I also interviewed parents, and also interviewed teachers of ninth graders and teachers of eighth graders. Excuse me, eighth grade teachers and ninth grade teachers. 95% of teachers thought that these skills were taught at home. 90% of parents thought they were taught at school. And at the bottom, the students told me that 90% no one taught them anything. They had to figure it out on their own. This is a really, really telling statistic, because this was in a school that was higher income, middle income, and you can imagine in lower income, this has got to be even lower. And so we've got to realize no one may be teaching these kids, and that means it falls on someone. Let's talk about the stages of reading development, and to kind of give you an overview, because I know that a lot of times in career tech education, when you and I come from industry, from the patrol car, the fire truck, or the courtroom, we aren't always given a full teacher immersion, as most teachers get. We tend to be given just enough to be dangerous, I think. So the stages of reading is stage one's pre-reading, and that's going to be oral. Mostly they're going to read out loud. They're going to begin to learn vocabulary. And so that's going to be where someone reads to them. As you and I know, I don't know if you've read this research, maybe you don't know this. The number one factor that they've studied across all socioeconomics, all racial categories, ethnic categories, heritage categories, immigration statuses, the number one factor in student success in school was how much someone read to the child when they were a child, and even into young adulthood. How much were they read to? My mother worked in a very, very high risk district, excuse me, in South Atlanta, and her reading level in kindergarten was the bottom. They were the lowest. And I can remember doing observations in her kindergarten classes, and kids would walk in the door and they would hand them books, and the students had never, you could tell that they didn't know how to hold them. They either held them out of like almost a weird, sacred regard, or just an inquisitive uh, unfamiliarity. Very few of them even knew that you read right to left or left to right. They tended to go either direction. They would go to the middle and maybe look at some pictures and set it down, and they typically didn't have a lot of interest in them. Um, Now, when the teacher sat down and began to read the book, they would instantly pile around the teacher, and they'd love to be read to. But you could tell that so many of these kids had actually no pre-reading prior to school. And then I juxtapose that to my own nephews and nieces, that there's a picture that my brother has of his grandchildren, and the oldest grandchild, who's about third grade, is reading a book, and all the younger children, all the way down to diapers, are just piled around him, listening to him read a book. And that's a big factor in children and in learning. And so many of our kids come into our school already at a negative. And my mother did a phenomenal job. She focused on literacy. That's where I kind of get the bug from. She had huge literacy. In fact, she got in a little trouble with their county because she had them reading almost all the time and doing basic math functions, not necessarily early on getting some of the other content and curriculum they're supposed to be covering, because she understood the importance of them learning to read. And to her credit, when they left her in fifth grade, her students tested at the same level as some of the high socioeconomic suburban schools, because she really, really got those kids to level. Sadly, 3 years later, those students were well below average. But nonetheless, that's another story for another time. So this stage one is super important. The kids are read to, they begin to pick up vocabulary, they see people read them. That's pre-reading. Then we start to see in stage two that they begin to develop sounds, and they begin to develop the letters and the sounds letters make, and they can do sound spelling, and they can begin to break words up by the way they sound. Very simple reading. And then stage three tends to be confirmation and fluency, where they begin to decode, they begin to become fluent, they begin to make their own strategies in developing and reading. Today, we do such a better job with people like myself with dyslexia, because I had to learn on my own my strategy as a high school student. Today, we really do a good job, particularly in the schools, of developing these reading levels in children. And this 1, 2, 3 does not correspond with first, second, third grade. This has nothing to do with that. In fact, we have students that are on level 3 coming into our high schools, and that's a struggle. 4, 5, and 6 are more of your advanced reading stages. Reading for learning is stage 4. That's where they begin to get reading habits. They begin to expand their vocabulary. They build a background and a world knowledge based upon their reading. I remember my mother telling me as a child, she grew up in a very impoverished part of the coal mining area in Virginia. And to her, reading was an escape. She read all the time because she got to read about things that she never got to experience and things that fed her dreams. So you'll have people maybe in stage 4 reading in elementary school, even stage 5 reading, the multiple viewpoints, critical analysis, being able to perceive the viewpoint of the author, beginning to see the viewpoints of the different characters. And then the highest reading level is 6, which is construction and reconstruction, which is where we can synthesize and look across different reading materials and begin to develop themes across reading. And that's, things that you do in college. If you're getting your master's, you're doing this all the time. If you got a bachelor's, you certainly did it. But you've got to go back and look. What I said earlier is a lot of our ninth graders are coming in at confirmation and fluency, which is stage 3. And what they need for industry is at minimum stage 4, and preferably stage 5 and 6. And these students that come in, I remember I had a student one time, I got him in ninth grade, had just come out of juvenile. They sent him to me because his juvenile offense wasn't necessarily something that was going to keep him out of law and law enforcement, but that because they knew I'd connect with him really well. And when I got him, his English reading level was second, third grade. When he graduated, he was on post college level reading. A big part of that was his motivation, his drive, his initiative. A big part of that, though, was things that I and 2 of his other teachers really poured into him. Today, that student of mine is at Oxford University in England learning advanced physics. It's just amazing what happens when you take time to slow down and teach a kid something. I'll never forget the kid. His name's Diego. He'd be on this call if I could get him from Oxford. But he came to me stage 2, 3. Now, not all our kids are going to excel like that. Diego was once in a career kind of student. But I did have a good number of students due to different reasons. One, I'll name him Ryan. When he came to me, he was definitely at 3. He struggled. I believe he was 4th grade reading level when I got him in 9th grade. Using some of the techniques I'm talking about, he moved through 4, made it to 5. At graduation, he was at or above reading level. Today, he is a police officer and does very well. So these stages of reading, you need to understand that one, I wanted to show you these to show the process and progress. 2, I want you to understand that we get so many of our students that have not had opportunities like my mother's school where they produced good readers. They just kind of bumble along and nobody's really talked to them. And so the question is, who's going to take this stage 3 reader? And I bet you some of us even still have stage 2 readers, particularly when we have students that are learning to read from other languages. They're going to be in 2 and 3. And so we've got to realize we need to build these students to stage 4 and stage 5. We start off with vocabulary because that's the anchor, and the vocabulary we tended to, and this was an epiphany for me when we did this reading program at a school I was at when I first got into literacy as a professional teacher. I was a little skeptical. It was back during No Child Left Behind. I could tell the whole purpose for the reading initiative and the literacy initiative was to boost our test scores. And I was a little, I'm not going to lie, I was a little cynical. But as I began to dig in, and particularly when I began to see how quickly students' reading scores went up with these methodologies, I began to really get into literacy. At the beginning, I was at kind of where you are probably right now. Well, why is this my problem? Why is it this language arts? And I'll tell you why, because language arts teachers, in often cases, I mean, not to bash language arts teachers, don't take this wrong, but some of them are terrible and some of them don't really care if the kids learn. And a lot of them get kids that are struggling and they're trying to stay on point with the majority of their kids. And a lot of kids do get left behind. And I think in the Career Tech classroom, we have an opportunity to set that around. So no, they don't know their vocabulary. And so we need to really get into, one thing I saw in my intro class when I started working these vocabulary strategies was I would have kids that would fail tests that I knew the content. And then I realized as I grew as a teacher is because they didn't have the vocabulary in the first place. So I encourage you every unit, when you go through the lesson plans we're developing for the state of North Carolina, they all start with vocabulary units because that's the ground level. The first thing we do is a word search. Why do we do a word search? Well, remember these kids back here in 2 and 3, they've got to break down the word. They have to decode it. That's why we do word search. Why do we then go to crossword? Because crossword, what I do in the crossword is the crossword answers are the definitions for those words. Because you give a kid a word and tell them to go find the definition, they may find there's a lot of definitions to words that mean several things. One recently I ran into that was interesting was extant. I'm beginning to hear that we're having conferences extant, meaning in person, because in person, virtually, you're still in person, but extant means present, one-on-one. Well, extant also means having survived extinction. So words can have multiple meanings. And so we want to make sure that the students are focusing on the meaning we need them to know. So we give them the words so they begin to break that word down, decode the word, learn the word, and the word search. Now, the funny thing is for your kids with dyslexia like me, we hate word searches, despise them, in fact. I hate them because words jumble around in our heads, but word searches help us learn how those words are structured. And so it's worth the fight. The next thing we do is the crossword. So we're going to give them the definitions that they need to know. And we're going to have them then try to find out the words and how they fit into the boxes. That helps them break the words down, but then it also begins to connect that word with the definition that you need them to know in class. Then I have my students, and you can have your students design flashcards. And Josh Clark shared with me a really cool flashcard strategy. I think he's been sharing that with you guys in his sections. But look for flashcards. The question comes up: can they do Quizlet? Quizlet's okay, but I'll tell you the cool thing about Quizlet is it's on their phone, and they'll have their phone. But I think them writing the word down on a card every time, and we learn this within printing. And maybe I'll talk about this in my next section on my section on pedagogy. And printing is so important to the kids because the more they write it, the more they manipulate it, the more they look at it, the more they talk about it, the more it imprints into their brain, the more that you're going to get the long term. You ever given a kid like a test and then 3 months later they don't remember anything from the test? It's because we failed to imprint the information well. We ended up giving them just a taste of the learning an inch deep instead of going a foot deep. Flashcards, I think writing them out and then using them help. Then they take a quiz. Kids, if you don't give them a test, they're not going to learn it. And a lot of times the kids come in and take the quiz without having studied. It frustrates me. But I actually let kids take quizzes until they passed them. And I know this goes against conventional thinking, but the fact is, I want the kids to learn the vocabulary. Is that our objective? Then I don't care if they take the quiz 5 times. Now, I don't take class time. They have to come back and make it up. And a lot of my kids knew that was a consequence. But I had a lot of kids that came in during lunch. A lot of kids came in before class, after class. Or I'd have a kid that would, I had business hours at night, and a kid knew that I could watch them on their phone while they did the quiz, and they could do the quiz at home. You got to work around that. You've got to have your own boundaries. That worked for me, may not work for you. But if you have the quiz, let them retake it until they pass it somehow. I also had open time in class. The kids could do kind of fun learning. And if you were behind, that's when we did remediation. So that's when the kids could take the quiz too. But eventually you want that kid to make a 70 or an 80, and I'd let them retake it until they made a 90 or 100. I had a lot of kids that would retake the quiz 4 and 5 times. And sometimes the quiz taught them the vocabulary. Do I care how they take the quiz? I don't, I mean, how they acquire the vocabulary. No, I want these kids to learn these words. You need to fall into a pattern of producing the outcome. And so much of what we do, as parents, we tend to like step back and go, oh my gosh, I'm just like my dad. Well, if your dad was a great parent, that's great. But sometimes as teachers, we find old habits that our teachers used or teachers that our mentors used. Use methods that achieve student learning, and be willing to, toss out your preconceived notions from time to time. And then as you're using that word in class, I always threw the word out. Hey, there's the vocabulary word on the PowerPoint slide. Or, you know, I would say the word in a lecture and say, hey, there's that vocabulary word. Told you guys you would use it. And just be sure that they see that the word's something they need to add in. So vocabulary, number one, fundamental level. And again, are you not teaching vocabulary? If you're not, then you're not doing your kids, you're doing a disservice. You need to teach vocabulary. And if you're not doing vocabulary in such a way where the kids are building on learning and progressing through the vocabulary, I see a lot of people that will teach vocabulary in 15 minutes and then just go on to the unit. You've got to make sure the kids have the vocabulary, because a lot of our kids, a good example, comprehend is a word. What's another word? Discretion. That's a word we use. Yeah, police discretion. We have kids that have never heard the word discretion, right? So I always exhibited a good level of word choice in my classroom to enforce and foster in them to stretch and learn vocabulary. Just the same way a Spanish teacher has their students learn. They use a lot of Spanish in class. We do need to stretch our student vocabularies, but we have to make sure they have an understanding of the words we're using first, or they're never going to learn anything at all. Very important. You can spend time on the vocab. Very important that you find a process that works for you. And those flashcards, kids would just go through them over. We'd have maybe a downtime, 15 minutes at the end of class. I'd be like, go through your flashcards, and the kids would go flashcards with each other to make sure that they retain that over time. Again, that's that back to that imprinting I was telling you. The more that they use it over the semester, the more they learn it. Then it becomes an anchor vocabulary term. Okay. Writing. Okay. So reading, writing, research. That's the 3 R's, right? Except writing, that's the second letter. This is super, super easy for us to teach in our class because we have our students writing in industry. We have them doing industry writing, right? Writing reports and things like that. And so that's super important that you teach this as a part of the process of industry. And I know fire and EMT may not as much report writing, but teach them report writing anyway, because as they progress through their ranks, they're going to write more. I know EMTs have to put a lot of field notes in and things like that. So find a way to incorporate the report writing. So start off with real quick and limited writing, like field interviews. Just let them get the questions, write it down, give you a paragraph of what happened, right? That's really the basis of writing, is we need them to learn how to write down what happened. That's fundamental to any industry. That's something that you can use to begin to develop writing skills, is just tell me what happened. Sometimes you will get terribly low writing. I don't spend a lot of time going over writing strategies per se in this particular presentation, but there is a lot of material out there. And there's a number of things you can learn about how to do some basic writing skills. For us, though, we're having them write what happened. So give them a mock interview, they take notes, then they turn around and write a very simple narrative, very simple paragraph, what happened. Then we move into easy police narratives. I have a whole unit on police report writing on the website, but and I think I may talk about it a little later, but you want to walk them through ever growing content so that they're beginning to learn how to do chronological writing and beginning to do writing that's in order and makes sense. As you grow over time, one thing I saw a teacher do, and I thought was a really cool idea, was after we did scenarios in lab, they would write police narratives after every single scenario-based lab. And so, the kids love doing high-risk pullover and firefighting. They may love, running ladders and such. We'll turn it into a scenario, and then when it's over, have them write a narrative of what happened. You can do this as an exit ticket out of the what they call it, ticket out the door. You can do this as a homework assignment. You can even say if you turn somebody in their extra credit, whatever you need to do, but give them time to sit down and write, or have them turn writing back in, and then just spot check it. And if you've got a kid that struggles a little bit, you may need to sit down with them and review it one on one rather than leave them notes. I had done a thing where I had big writing assignments where I would use a headphone and record audio, and then I would link the audio back to the kids where they knew their numbers, and I would have feedback that way. That's a possibility. They do really well with audio narrative of their writing skills. And then this was really interesting. I was in a program out in Sacramento, California, and they had to write up discipline issues. So while I was there one day, they'd had a sub. A sub had left a note that that class had misbehaved. The teacher, the police officer, had everyone in the class stop, and they wrote a narrative of what had happened the day before, as if it was a police narrative. And over the course of the narrative, the kids had to explain what happened, if they had done something, what they had done that was wrong, take accountability for that. He had a kid come in late to class about 5 minutes, and the kid, instead of handing him a note, sat down and wrote a police report, or not a police report, but a narrative on why they were late. And I thought that was super, super cool to turn a disciplinary situation into yet another learning experience of writing. So you can turn writing into all sorts of opportunities. So here's the police reports I was mentioning earlier, and this is kind of a process that I came across through my literacy research and then just through practice. I taught intro probably 80 times over, maybe even 100 times over my last 22 years of teaching law and public safety. I guess it would be over 100 times. Anyway, start off with the field interviews, right? Simple. They're jotting notes down. A lot of kids don't know how to write notes. They don't know how to take notes of what they're doing in life. I think it's funny that you'll hear teachers, oh, my students can't take notes in class. Did you ever teach them? Did you ever go over the process? So you got to go over the process in field interviews of who, what, when, where, getting the information, and then later you can build field interview into teaching them interrogation skills as well. But even though you're doing that, you're building to a new level. Make sure they're jotting the notes down. Make sure they're doing the writing at the same time. So see, you're not necessarily adding to what you're already doing. You're improving what you're already doing. So what we did with field interviews, first stage is, I've got a PowerPoint on this. I have it on the Lapson website. If you email me, I'll be glad to email you the link. Tom@lapson.org. Anything you have a question on, Tom@lapson.org. I'll be glad to send you the link to my report writing and PowerPoint and everything there. But we go over reports and such. Well, the first thing I do is, once I kind of cut them loose on narratives, is I have them do the individual attempts. So they all sit down on their own. We do a very simple interview with someone who has had a lawnmower stolen out of their garage. Very simple. Keep it very simple. And then they make an attempt at writing their narrative based upon what I've taught them. Well, then what I do before I even look at them is I combine them into groups of 3s and 4s. And this is where I recommend that you intentionally have your group set up, mix them by grade level, by skill levels, and have them read each other's out loud to each other. And I know that's a little intimidating for some of your basic learners, and so if you've got a super low learner or two, you may want to put them in with a group of people that are going to be more compassionate. You want to be careful. You want to be careful with that. And it may be that you have your own group if you have some super low learners, that you supervise a group yourself, but you have them read it out loud. The other ones read it out loud, and then they critique each other. What did they remember to add? What did they not add? What were they missing? Then have them as a group write a narrative together, because they experience the same experience. You have one student do the scenario of the stolen lawnmower. They're all taking notes as if they're the responding officer. So they all experience the same thing. Then you have the group write their own group narrative, so that then they are able to see how other people strategize in writing. And, well, first we need to do this, and that came second, and it really begins to model. But make sure that you just don't have one kid writing the narrative. Make sure all the kids are participating and coaching the rewrite. Then give them an example, a copy you wrote, a very simple narrative, or one that a student wrote, and let them see how the ideal narrative went, and explain to them that there's multiple ways to write a narrative, that everybody may be a slightly different, but basically 95% should be the same. Then as an exit out the door or as a homework, have them rewrite their original. Take the samples away and give them their notes back of the original notes and let them rewrite their narrative. And hopefully they've learned in this process. I do this all the way through. We the next time we do a scenario, we build up a longer scenario where they interview somebody that's a little longer, and I do this exact same process again. And I think I've done this process as many as 4 or 5 times with some of my lower learners to make sure that they get this down. Now, if I've got a class that gets through it pretty quick, like I said, I'd have them do narratives throughout the year. So every time we have a lab, they're writing narratives. Every time we do a scenario based in class, they're writing a narrative. And over time, and that's when I start doing individual feedback and coaching and work that through. So this is report writing, which is an industry thing that all of us should be teaching, even in fire and EMT. They need to learn how to write after incident reports. They need to write how to HR. Good Lord, that's become a big part of fire. I was reading, reports of inappropriate behavior. Well, knowing how to write a good narrative, that'll definitely cover some people's tails, right? Now, research, the third R, is going to be over a course. And I hate that this is a real brief summary. I could spend a lot of time on this, but research is critical. But one thing that's great about research is you can have students research part of the lesson. So let's say, like when I taught last year history of fire, I had the students. I gave each student an incident in the history of fire or historical fires. They all had to write their parts, and then they did research and came back and shared with the group. That's research. That's writing. That's reading. Research is the apex here, because if the students can read and if the students can write, then they can do research. So do you see how that your reading and writing culminates in a research project? And you can do these at minimal stages. You can do this at small stages with kids that can't read very well. You may do the research where they just do an oral presentation initially, and then over time convert their oral. I had to work with a kid a number of years ago, really, really, really low writing skills that I had gotten transferred in from another school. I actually let him go into my office and he would record, because his writing was really bad, but he could get the words out with his mouth. He would record himself, and then he would transcribe the recording later. As time progressed, he began to transcribe his reading and writing. Ironically, I had his language arts teacher come by and thank me profusely. She was a new teacher. She had no idea that was a methodology. His scores had really improved in language arts, which is another story. But anyway, let's talk about research. The research is a culmination of them using reading and writing together to create new material, to synthesize material. You've got to think, if you're going to move anywhere in a company or anywhere in for that to be a fire company or whether that be a police department, you're going to have to begin to write emails and research things that you're teaching. And so this is really important across the board. First thing is I teach them short answer in my first class, my first test. I give them a short answer where they have to. I teach them. I said, short answer. You rephrase the question, you answered the question in 1 or 2 sentences, and then, if necessary, you do a closure. Taught them how to make a very simple short answer question. So actually, to be clear, let me back that up a step. Actually, in the first test, I allowed them to bullet the answer. So let's say the question was, geez, man, I don't know, what was the contributing factors to me choosing dinner last night? I'm just throwing that out there. One, we had to go with a coupon. Two, we wanted something that was tasty and we liked something spicy. And three, it had to be nearby. So the first one, I let them just simply bullet the answers, right? Coupon, cheap, nearby, tasty, right? Then in the second test, I had them shift over from those bullets. I also showed them how to create bullets on a study guide. Remember, I told you we think kids learn how to study. They don't have a clue. And so one thing I taught them on short answers was collect the bullet points. And then on the first test, they gave me the bullet points. In the second test, then I had them rephrase the word. When we went to dinner last night, we took a unique way to determine where we were going to eat dinner, and then give me the bullets. First bullet would be, well, we decided we wanted to use a coupon and save money. Secondly, we were hungry for something really spicy. We wanted something with a lot of flavor. And then thirdly, we wanted something nearby because we didn't have a lot of time to go to dinner. These were the steps that I used in determining how to eat dinner last night. So we just took a short answer, which most of your kids wouldn't even know how to answer right in ninth grade or the right when you get them. We taught them how to do the bullet points. We let them do that on the test. The next test, we taught them how to rewrite the short answer. How long did it take me to teach this to the kids? Few minutes on the review day, a few minutes after the test was over. I did not have to take a lot of time to teach this. I did give them a little cheat sheet, not with the answers, but on how to do short answer. Then as the year progresses, I give them longer answers where they actually now have to develop a separate paragraph for each one. And I know you're thinking, language arts should be doing that. No, I found out, so I was at a really good school for a while. I mean, one of the top schools in Georgia, and the kids were not being taught any of this stuff on how to write research. It was stunning. So somebody's got to teach it, and so that, why not me? So we began to progress where they began to expand those answers out and begin to give me 2 paragraph answers, three, what were the 3 things that guided the Miranda decision or whatever, and begin to give them the stretch out. What are the first things you do in a fire assessment? Begin to give them ways to write those long answers out. So, and sometimes it helps to do practice with this as well, to let them pre-write maybe the day of the review, and then the day of the test, they have an idea what's right. And then your culmination in this, and all your courses should be a research project of some type. You can do traditional papers. I let the kids choose topics because I learned from Miss Brown back in 9th grade that if you let a kid choose a topic, they tend to be a lot more involved and a lot more interested. And I usually give them a list of topics because a lot of kids, it's funny. It's like, choose a topic related to anything in criminal justice. And they're literally, I told them if they asked me for a topic, I'd give them a terrible one, like compare and contrast 1930 Supreme Court decisions to 1960 Supreme Court decisions. Just give them something, a terrible topic, but do give them a list of topics because kids do sometimes have a hard time brainstorming that way. I actually let my kids do websites. I told them to make kind of Wikipedia articles, and then we put them all together on one page, and all the kids went and looked at their peers and how they did. Sometimes we did traditional papers, and we did a thing called Socratic dialogue, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But give them something that they're going to research. They're going to learn something. It doesn't have to be the traditional hypothesis statement. I just said, what are you really into? And a lot of the boys and some of the girls will say SWOT. Oh my gosh, we got a billion SWATers. Fine, but give them different SWOT so you don't lose your mind. Have one do HRT and one do the history of SWAT, break it up, and they love it. But you teach them how to do research. One thing I find surprising that even adults don't know how to do research. Start off, the first thing teachers tell kids is don't use Wikipedia. Completely disagree. I tell kids the best place to start is Wikipedia. It's the worst place to end. Go to Wikipedia, read about the topic you're interested in, learn the words. What are you going to go search? If you're a 9th grader with a 4th grade reading level, and we're telling them to go research a paper, they don't know where to start. Let them read Wikipedia and learn the vocabulary, and then get some of those keywords they go put into Google, and then they'll start finding things that work. Teach them what a good site is and what a bad site is, because that's something they don't know. There's so much. You'll have kids quoting Twitter, so be careful with that. But do spend a little bit of time on research. I know you're thinking, but you know what? You end up with better kids who can do better work down the road. I had the philosophy. I got lucky. I had kids for 3 years in a row. And that first year, I was determined to fix them. I love 9th graders because you can fix them. I'd made them my own. I taught them how to do headers on the papers. I told them how to turn stuff in. They learned my system. Granted, I spent probably the first 6 weeks of my class, a third of my time just training them. But you know what? Through my law enforcement class, my forensics class, I reaped the benefit of kids knowing how to prepare for tests, knowing how to use a review sheet, knowing how to turn paperwork in. Then it was just a factor of getting them turned in because they're lazy, right? It wasn't a question of they didn't know how. Spend time teaching this stuff. And it's also, so think about a content item. Like, let's just say history of fire is a good example from fire. You could actually have them do some research and then create a Wikipedia, and then they work with a team to maybe do one of the decades or one of the movements in fire research. And that could be independent while you're teaching them in class knots or something else or some kind of lesson or skill, and they're working on this on the side. So rather than think of history as a unit, think of history as something they can do in a research project over time. And then in the end, they read each other's, critique each other's, or some other methodologies. And so stop thinking that everything has to be units that's done in a separately. You can have them learn, and this gets true with law enforcement, history of law enforcement. They could do that over a couple of weeks in little side class projects. And you guys that have 90-minute blocks, you got to give them something to do more than just the same thing for 90 minutes. Let them have every day that they're doing their time on their research, and they go spend 15 minutes work on the next part of their history of law enforcement, or, just think about ways that you can incorporate this. So the kids can teach themselves stuff as well. So think about, we're being encouraged to stop being the sage on the stage, give them some time to work on their own on a project where they're teaching themselves. I saw Lee, last name slides right now. He's there in North Carolina. I loved how he got Wikipedia articles to create the content for his class. The kids were going out and reading. That is literacy, and that's perfect. That is literacy. You got them out reading this Wikipedia stuff. They're answering sheets on a worksheet. Then they're answering questions and answering in paragraphs. That's everything I just taught you. So that's not something that's hard. You can already do it. Other opportunities for you to drop writing into your classes, mock trials. Okay, even if you're doing fire EMT, we have that legal part. Let them do a mock trial about Goldilocks, being charged with burglary and trespass, and let them have fun with it. But they're going to teach them how to write opening statements and closing arguments and things like that. Socratic seminar, this is something I picked up from my social studies teachers. It's where kids do research and then they come to class and they discuss it. Google Socratic seminar. I did it as final exams. Our school got all weird on finals, so I was like, let's do Socratic seminar. And it was a great way to end the semester. It was an easy thing to grade. The kids loved it over traditional exams. Anyway, take a look at Socratic seminar. I think Socratic seminar is better than debate. It's like debate on steroids. But it's still not any harder. And it teaches the kids how to make comments and contribute to discussions, and it's comfortable with extroverts and introverts. Anyway, debate, old school debates are awesome. I used to love that for anything in my class that was semi-controversial. We debated death penalty, and we debated in fire. We debated should how local residences be required to have sprinkler systems. They had a great debate with that. And then also creative reply. Sometimes you can give them ways to be a little more creative. There's other ways that you can incorporate writing in. So reading culture. So you come into reading, and I'm trying to go through a lot of material with you guys. I apologize. I've only got a little bit of time left, so I'm gonna have to speed up a little bit. So getting your kids to read in class, believe it or not, is not very hard. Initially, when I was introduced to this idea from Jama Wilbank, she's an EMT teacher that teaches EMT and health science over here in Georgia. She had this idea of kids reading in class. I was like, my kids are never going to do that. I was so wrong. First of all, collaborate on rules. What should the rules be if everybody's going to be reading for 10, 15 minutes? Let the kids brainstorm on that. And I talk to the kids about, I can't read if there's noise. I'm ADHD. If you're tapping your pen, I'm not paying attention to the thing I read. And everyone's like, oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a good idea. Let the kids create their reading culture rules, collaborate on those, and then post them. Explain to them that reading is like a muscle, right? If you've got huge, strong legs, but really weak arms, do you just go to leg day? No, you need to go to arms day. In fact, you need to work out your arm and chest more than you do your legs. Teach them that they're all strengths. They all have strengths. They all have weaknesses. The muscles like a brain. The more you work out the part of your brain you need to improve on, like reading, stronger it gets. It will happen. But encourage them in that. Talk about reading strategies. And I don't have time to get in that right now, but I did talk to the kids about the way I read and how to reread and things. There's you're gonna have to Google that. Consider allowing earbuds. There's research that says that if kids and adults listen to background music, now this is something that's tough because the kids want to listen to their favorite music, but the reality is some of the worst music to listen to is lyrical music. So that's rap, that's rock, that's pop. And I also told kids, don't listen to your favorite music because you're anticipating the song instead of instead of reading the words. So I encourage them. There's a band called Hammock, like a thing you swing in the backyard. It sounds like the music they play at aquariums and museums, but it's really good background noise. I actually had a kid that I suggested listen to fan noise, like that white noise. That worked for him. Try to encourage them to do lyrical music. If you're in an environment where you want to teach them, maybe expose the kids to good music like jazz or blues. There's a lot of blues and jazz out there that's instrumental. If you want to expose them to some good old Pink Floyd or something, so try to encourage them to get in some non lyrical music. But anyway, we found out that by putting the earbuds on, by putting on some non-lyrical music, I definitely saw mass improvement in my kids, and they began to really enjoy the reading time because it filtered out the world and they could focus on the book. And also I chose good things to read, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Adjust the lighting. I actually brought in you don't need super bright lighting to read, and I actually had some dimmable lights that I was able to still have enough reading light. Kids loved that. They called it the Starbucks lights. I did have to invest a little money and grab a whole bunch of those little floor lamps that you can adjust. The kids ate it up because reading culture was not only a change in what we were doing, and they were able to listen to earbuds because I never allow earbuds in my classroom, but also I turned the lights off, those harsh fluorescents, and turned those floor lamps and the kids loved it. It was like a different environment. It took them to a different place. Allow them to get comfortable. I had blankets in my room because our school tended to be cold, which was okay for me because I'm a Sasquatch. But my girls and some of my boys got cold a lot, and so I kept a lot of blankets in my room and I washed them regularly. I allowed them to put a blanket on the floor and get comfortable on the floor and read a book. I mean, let them do that and talk about how much you enjoy reading, or even lie if you hate reading. But anyway, talk about how enjoyable reading is and how you can experience different things. This is something you can. There's more on this elsewhere, but you've got to establish a reading culture. And literally, my kids, we would come into a session and go, "Okay, guys, I called it reading culture. It's a reading culture time. What does that mean?" And they knew it. They couldn't work on other stuff. They would read what we were reading. They would put their earbuds on, but not loud enough to bother others. They wouldn't distract others. Blah 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 blah. We changed the lights over. I actually had kids that did that for me, and they read. I cannot explain to you the magic that happened, and hopefully you can recreate that. We can bottle lightning twice, right? Some tips on reading: start small. Maybe a Wikipedia articles. I use a lot of magazine articles in my first year. Articles that I cut and copied out of like Popular Mechanics. I got an old article on the mechanisms of death, how they execute people. The kids love that article. Firefighting. There's a ton on equipment and how fire systems operate, or, and I'll talk to you about journals in a second, but start small articles, right? If you remember we were in school, teacher would throw a book out. What was the first thing we did? Or at least me, I looked at the last page, 213 pages. I'm never going to get through this. Give the kids small articles to start and use articles all the way through. My forensics course, my kids read probably 4 articles every single unit about current stuff in forensics. Make sure that there's vocabulary in what they're reading, that you've reviewed it, or you've given them the vocabulary on a page, or put it on the board. One thing I had was that if you came across a word you didn't know, run up to the board and write it down, and then give me a definition. And I actually gave them Smarties, those little wrapped up sugar candies. I'd give them a Smartie every time for the first kid that had a good vocabulary word. And by the end of first period, all the vocabulary was on the board kids didn't know, and the next period it was already done. Give them vocabulary cheat sheets if it's not part of the unit vocabulary. Build their speed over time and their volume over time. Start off with maybe 5 paragraph articles, build over time, and then begin to look to use books for interest. And I'm going to try to go over that really quickly, and then begin. And I always start off with my reading and books to be books with independent chapters, meaning that let's say we're going to read. Good examples is a book called Actual Innocence by Barry Scheck, and it's about the Actual Innocence Project. And there's probably 23 chapters in that book, and we read, well, maybe it's 18 chapters. We read like 11 chapters out of the book, but each chapter was its own story and had its own beginning and ending. And then that way, if a kid fell behind, they could finish that and catch up later. Or if the kid jumped ahead, or if a kid missed several reading assignments, they go ahead and read what we were on because we're going to discuss it in class, and they were able to know what was going on. Like if you're reading Great Gatsby and you read the middle 50 pages, nothing makes sense, right? But if you're reading a book that every chapter is its own story, then that's really useful for the kids. And it's also easier for this child who's a struggling learner, emerging learner, to keep that material in their head, so that in the next chapter it's like, woo, I can let go of that. I remember trying to read Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which was a dumb idea for a guy with dyslexia because of all the German words, but I managed to make it through. But every page was new people and new information. You had to keep up with stuff from 30 pages back. It drove me nuts. So try to give your kids these easier to read books, okay? For some assignment ideas, always have reading assignments in every chapter. Every chapter you teach, you can find a small article for them to read, a small portion of the textbook, a Wikipedia page or two, and have them summarize. I use journals where I tell the kids, hey, particularly if we're reading something longer, I'm like, Sparks Notes always make a joke that the best authors in history were the Notes brothers. You got Sparks Notes and his brother Cliff Notes. But anyway, if you're in Sparks, if you tell the kids, y'all know Sparks Notes or whatever, they don't, show them one, and just say, hey, you're going to write Sparks Notes for me. You're going to read these 5 pages and break it down to digestible, couple of bullet points or something. A big part is the key. This is really big. They got to think about what they're reading. And then also this ties into the last one, which is stopping and think about who, what, and where. If you can get them to stop as they go and write down who, what, where, and you can get them to think about what they've read, you're going to see these kids grow so fast in reading. You alone are going to dramatically. And let me give the story really quick. Had a kid named, I called him earlier. His name was Ryan. He came to me 4th grade reading level. I gave him magazine articles in 9th grade. I gave him portions of the textbook in 9th grade. 10th grade, we moved up to more of the textbook. This is back in the day. We didn't have a lot of journals and stuff. He started coming in and getting journals for me. There was a way kids could get extra credit to read journals. He would, starting in ninth grade, he knew when the news, when those journals were coming in, because I used to subscribe to them, and he would take the magazine first thing. I mean, he would get it from my desk and go read he loved to read law enforcement, one law enforcement magazine, might have been policing. And he went from, I think it was fourth grade reading level, might have been third grade reading level, ninth grade. He graduated on college level reading. The only thing we fundamentally did different, because I worked with the special ed teachers too, the only thing we could target that to was me getting him to read stuff he was interested in. Better, so if you can get them to slow down and write down their journals, I mean their thoughts as they go, and ask questions every couple of pages, your good readers get frustrated, because those of us who can read well, slowing down drives us nuts. We want to finish it, we want to read through it, we want to get through the content. But for your emerging readers, don't just let your good readers get frustrated. Your emerging readers are going to be the ones that really benefit. So ideally, here's the thing. So let's say you have a Wikipedia article, and that Wikipedia article is 7 paragraphs. Do some guided questions as they go. I never mix questions up. I always drive me crazy when because then it ends up being the kids don't read, they go on treasure hunt, or they do F1 and search for the word. Give them the questions that go in the order that they read in. It's just a better thing. Then as they read, they see the question and they get the answer, and they read the next question. And then while they're reading, they're trying to find that information, and they can answer it as they go. And then if they see that they missed it, they can back up and reread. At the end, have them do something like, what was the most interesting thing you read in that? Or tell me, if you were doing a PowerPoint on this article, what are 5 things that you'd put in that PowerPoint? Or I used to do top 10 list when they would read like a magazine article that was like 4 pages. What were the top 10 things the reader wanted you the writer wanted you to learn? Just getting them to synthesize. But for your emerging readers, they've got to stop every couple of paragraphs. And that's why I like the guided notes. Also, if you can get them to when I do my first year class, they read Hot Zone, which is about Ebola. Highly recommend that for all of y'all. Fits all your pathways. And it's an easy read, and it's interesting. It goes over the history of AIDS. It goes over Ebola, talks about virology and immunology. It's super cool, and it's a great story. And then in the end, you can show them the movie, which was really good, that came out recently. So the kids can go through. I'd have them at the end of each page write a summary, cliff notes of what was going on, and that drove them nuts. But for the first 2 or 3 chapters, we did that. So the 4th, 5th chapter, they wrote it every 2 pages. I could already see improvement in reading in my kids at my lower levels. It works really, really well. But like I said, my better readers hated it. Hated it. Warning about quizzes about what you read. Let them do open Sparks notes. So if they're doing Sparks notes and you're giving them quizzes as they go, let them be able to reference that, because your emerging readers, nothing's more frustrating, I can tell you this from experience, than reading and trying your best to decode all those words, and you get through all those pages, and then you take the quiz and you don't know an answer. And it's not because they didn't read, it's because their reading comprehension is so low. So if you let them go back and look at their journal, if they've written, 1, it encourages everybody to do better journals. 2, they can get the answers and they feel like they've accomplished something. So I have so much to cover with y'all in this literacy. I could probably do a whole week on. Really quick, when can you read? That's the next question. You guys are like, okay, Dr. Washburn, you kind of got us thinking about, okay, I can see I can fit this in, but where? Start a class. How many times start a roll? I knew I was going to start a roll, and I knew I had to hand forms out like for NTHS or something. I would say, hey guys, starting class today with reading culture, jump into your books, turn the lights over, let them get their headbuds on, take roll, do all my stuff, hand those papers out, whatever I had to do. And then I would click the light on and off, and that let them know that they had a minute left to read. And then we'd start class. Think about that. How much time do you waste every day in class? I calculated for me, I wasted 35 minutes a week. 35 minutes. I had kids, we read whole novels in the time I wasted. Think about that, okay? Gaps in class, like you come in, let's say you're having to check off something like handcuffing skills, I don't know, something, Skills USA forms or something, puts a gap in class. Got a girl come in, she's crying about a breakup with a boyfriend. Got a guy come in, he's really upset because his dog died. I mean, you guys know this stuff, right? Just say, hey guys, reading culture, and then pull over to the side and deal with the kid. Or, my favorite's administrators that come in with some kind of paperwork. I literally say reading culture, and boom, the kids were on it. Breaks and activities. Okay. End of class. You got a class that's 10 minutes ahead of the other class. Let them read. My kids begged to read. I know this sounds crazy. By my 2nd year, my kids couldn't wait to have time to read. I had a time in my 3rd year class where they got to choose what they read. They would beg me to get to that time. I let them choose from a list, and one of them was a collection of Sherlock Holmes. Kids love that stuff. After a test, man, what I try to teach my kids to love reading, try to make them lifelong readers. I said, what's the best thing you can do after a test? Forget about the test and just read a good book. Okay. So that's time. The Lapson Literacy Project, I'm barely going to make it through this. We have lapson.org. We're adding stuff. We did it through 2021, but we're going to push it into 2022 as well. I need you guys to submit ideas, things that have worked for you. Please, your submissions are so awesome. We're adding stuff all year. The lapson.org is up and running. I'm going to show you that in the last slide. And then Google really, really helps. If you don't know it, Google it. If you're like, hey, I bumped into this kid that can't read, there's so much reading material out there. So let me go to the next one and show you our literacy page. So this is our literacy page. And if you come on, here's the 3 R's I reviewed. Here is essentially a copy similar to what I did with y'all. Y'all can also look at this recording. Look at this. I gave you guys an entire page of all these journals that are free online. And there's something in every single one of y'all's pathways. Okay. Let those kids go on there and read journals. You read the journals, catches you up on what's going on in industry too. Here's some books and things I suggested for reading. Just read that. Monster, super low reading level. Be careful it's not already read in your middle school, but that's a great book to get kids into. Oh my gosh, To Kill a Mockingbird. Granted, it's one of the few novels that I have. Kids love reading that. It is very controversial, so be sure to study it. We read Black Sloth's a little older, Dead Reckoning a little older. 3,000 Degrees, that's about that Worcester cold storage fire. That was a great one for my fire class. Hot Zone's really good for all of us because we teach immunology, with COVID and stuff. Just go through and read these. I got tons of information there on the website. Here's some implementation and reading information and what to do and how to do it and some ideas. And that's where we're going to be adding some more ideas. And then I got some great links here. Okay. There's that Frayer model flashcards that Josh turned me on to. So guys, go to the website. Please dig through that material. I really could have spent a whole nother hour talking to you guys. I know I'm right at my end of my time. I hope I didn't bore you. I hope I got you excited about literacy though, guys. Think about it. If I hadn't had Miss Brown, could I have not graduated high school? I don't know. I don't know. She definitely made me the reader I am today. There's no way I would have gotten a PhD, definitely without Miss Brown. So you can be that Miss Brown. You can really turn these kids on to reading. I ran into the kid Ryan I told you about. Well, now he's not a kid; he's 44. He still gets Policing Magazine. You can change these kids in such a positive way. Give them a better future. Literacy is anchor. It doesn't matter how well you teach ladder raising. Doesn't matter how well you teach how to stop bleed. Doesn't matter how much you teach how well it is to handcuff. We have failed if the kid leaves our classroom and isn't a better reader, a better writer, and stronger in those areas. So I hope you catch the bug a little bit here. I hope you look at the website. And you guys, I hope you enjoyed this. And we'll have a live session in a moment to talk about more.